Hi, due to a slow internet connection here in Colombia, I've been having difficulties uploading large video files to the Blackboard. So after failing a few times with this lecture, I decided to create a new version that would contain only the most important information, and hopefully the shorter file will eventually upload. So I'll focus on the things that you need for the exam as well as for the take-home assignment, the last one, in case you choose to complete it. So there will be question, for example, how important is culture? And so I have here a sample of articles that I chose or had on my shelves about 10 years ago when I was first asked that question. And so in then that half an hour or so, I was able to find lots of articles, empirical studies that had empirical evidence on the effects or of the effects of culture in the workplace. And so you don't need to remember this list. The point here is that there are many studies that show that people from different cultures have different perceptions, different preferences for negotiation style, for management style, and all that stuff. In terms of what specifically or how much specifically culture matters, I actually conducted a study, and you will have an exam question about that. Well, it does matter, matters a lot, but does not explain everything. Just because you know where someone's from, you wouldn't be able to predict perfectly his or her behavior. Moreover, culture explains behaviors well at the national or organizational level, and much less so at the individual level. In other words, if you have, let's say, 200 people from China, and you know their culture, you can fairly accurately predict what the majority of the people will do in a given situation or what they would prefer in a given situation. At the same time, if you have one individual and you have to make the judgment, well, there is a very good chance you will be wrong. So at the group level, predictions are more accurate than at the individual level. In terms of how culture relates to, or how is it comparatively a good predictor compared to other commonly used predictors of organizational behavior, well, culture is not as strong a predictor of behavior or performance as IQ is, for example. So if you know somebody's IQ, you can much more accurately predict how well the person will perform. However, culture definitely has a stronger correlation with future performance, preferences, attitudes, and other organizational behaviors than, for example, personality or demographics. So commonly when people are hired for work, they would be given a personality test, their age, education level, gender, race. All those things are often taken into account, and those things unfortunately are not good as are not as good at predictors as culture is. Furthermore, culture has the strongest effect on work-related emotions, like perceptions of justice and stuff like that, followed by attitudes, then behaviors, and then performance. And so if you were to use somebody's culture, you can fairly accurately predict what the person will believe, but much less so what the person will actually do or how the person will perform. Particularly with performance, what matters is not the actual values of the person, but the value fit to the organization and the task. So it doesn't mean that, for example, individualists always perform better than collectivists. What matters is that individualists perform better under the conditions where individual performance is rewarded, whereas collectivists, for example, perform better when the team performance is rewarded. So those contingencies are more important than the actual direct effect. In terms of diversity and performance, do diverse teams perform better? Well, again, there will be a question on the exam about that, and studies show that diverse teams perform better on creative tasks, and homogeneous teams perform better on routine tasks. So if you need creativity, you want diversity. If you just need the work done, assembly line or something very simple, diversity may actually be a problem. Also, time. Over time, initially, when the people don't know each other, homogeneous teams obviously perform better. People have more in common, they know how to communicate with one another, so they work better in the short run. Diverse teams, though, even though they have problems in the short run, over time as they adjust to one another, those people tend to outperform homogeneous teams. Now, in terms of communication, my slides are jumping. There will be no direct questions about that on the exam about this model, but you will need to for the take-home assignment. Just a second, somebody came. Coming.
Ay, disculpe, buenas tardes. ¿Puede con la tercera que nos revise la habitación?
I don't speak Spanish, sorry.
El aseo, claim.
Oh, no, I'm checking out. So no
Check
need.
out.
Yeah,
¿A
I'll
qué
check
horas?
out. Yes, I will be out in 1 hour.
En una
En
hora.
una hora,
En
yes.
una hora.
Yeah.
Bueno, que tenga un feliz viaje.
Yes,
Qué
no
bueno.
problem. Yeah. All right, so my Spanish obviously was not enough to communicate with that lady, but I guess we got it out, got it sorted out. So on the exam, you will not be asked specifically about different communication styles, but you will be, on the take-home assignment, you will be asked what would be common challenges in cross-cultural teams, and communication differences would be one of them. And it's not only the language differences. Language is easy, you just learn the language and that's it. The style, that's something that is much more difficult to learn, and so those things matter. And so here is one of the models of how people communicate, and you have kind of distribution by countries. I'm going to focus on the details, but I'll talk about some things like, for example, speech pace. Language is easy, but speech pace is much more difficult to spot. In some cultures, like here in Colombia, for example, people speak very fast. Latinos tend to speak very fast. People, for example, from some other cultures tend to speak very slowly, much slower, like, for example, Northern Europeans. And so when you have those two people together, those who speak fast may be perceived by those who tend to speak slower in their culture. So as basically either, blah, 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 or not trustworthy or something else. On the other hand, those cultures where pace of speech is faster may perceive those who speak slower as, maybe not knowledgeable enough because they cannot really formulate their thoughts quickly. Studies have shown that in controlled experiments, when a series of videos is shown to an audience and people are asked which person knows more about the subject, in, for example, Latin American cultures, those who spoke faster were perceived as more credible, whereas in North European cultures, those who spoke slower were perceived more credible. Interruption rate, again, something that is not easy to learn. In Japan, for example, you not only never interrupt, you sometimes would have an extended period of silence. And by extended period of silence, I mean like 5 minutes. Like I stopped here for 10 seconds and it's already uncomfortable. And imagine that for 5 minutes I was keeping silence. And so that's an important part of their communication process. But then again, to Americans that looked very strange. At the same time, Americans, with their urge to say something in that silent moment, looked to the Japanese as not respectful enough, or that kind of problem. When the words are similar, sometimes, when the languages are similar, sometimes that may lead to a problem, and we talked about that in the context of cross-cultural marketing, so I'm going to skip that here. Even numbers are different. Like, for example, American 1 is different from the European 1, so this is the European 1, and to you probably it looks like 7. This is the American 7, and this is the European 7. This number here would look more like 60 on American, but would look more like 40 a European. Your 6 doesn't have this hook on the top, and in many other cultures it does. Your 9 looks like your 9, whereas in many other cultures 9 looks actually more like a G. Symbols obviously mean different things, and that may lead to confusion. And again, I'm running fast through this, but obviously there are many more examples here. Gestures may mean different things, and this one is my favorite. So when you nod in America, that means yes, and when you shake your head, that means no. But for example, in Albania and Bulgaria, that's just the opposite, and it's very confusing, and obviously that may lead to a problem. Appearance may matter, so when people look different, they are first less comfortable to talk, but at the same time, when they do talk, they are paid less attention to, and studies have shown that so many times. So the phenomenon has been observed who knows how many times and how long. If you read the Little Prince by Exupéry, that's a required reading in most European schools, there is a story there about a guy who comes from the Middle East to a conference in Europe, and dressed as he would at home. Nobody listens to him. Then the guy comes next year, buys a suit and a tie and a shirt, and looks like a normal guy, and everybody loves his ideas. So definitely that matters still, and a lot. Inequalities, language proficiency inequality is a huge deal. I mean, studies show it again and again and again and again and again that those who speak with an accent, for example, tend to be perceived as less trustworthy, as less knowledgeable, and so on and so on and so on. And the experiments have been conducted even with little, like 4-year-old, 3-year-old kids. In one that boggles me most is a guy walks into the room and introduces himself either with an accent in one condition or without an accent in another condition. And then he approaches a table, and there are all kinds of toys on the table, and the kids are like 1.5 to 2 years old. and he would show how to use those toys, like for example, this is a drum and this is a stick, and you bend the drum with the stick. And so not only the kids liked the one who introduced himself without an accent more, but they actually performed, like actually band on the toys better, or did repeat after the guy better, after the one who didn't speak, who spoke without an accent. And the amazing part is that the actual explanation was only showing, so there was no talking involved. The talking was only the introduction. And so again, this is kids who don't even know the differences, among the cultures and stuff, and even at that level it matters, which tells us that it's not some language or some people who are prejudiced, or some cultures that think that they're better than others, or chauvinist. No, that was purely, this is something we've developed over the course of evolution, and that's something that has an impact on how our brain operates. Self-promotion, and we talked a little bit about that in one of the previous lectures, but again, in different cultures, people self-promote to a different extent. One study looked at singles ads in Japan and the United States and found that there was a huge difference in how people present themselves, how they promote themselves on those websites. Even my mother, who is an excellent cook in Ukraine, where self-promotion is not really acceptable or frowned upon, when she serves food, she would always say something like, there is nothing special to offer, it's not very delicious, but maybe you like it, that kind of stuff. Whereas in America and Canada, people are much more self-promoting, and this is perfectly fine. The reason it is important that if you, let's say, come from the United States and you have employees from Asia who are much more taught to be much more modest in communication, when the time comes to interview them for a job, you may perceive that as not lack of differences in communication style, but as a lack of confidence or skills. And so that has been again shown so many times in controlled experiments. And vice versa, an American may look like too pushy to, for example, a guy from Asia. So that may definitely have an effect on who gets the job, who gets promoted, and so on and so on. And again, many studies have shown this dramatic difference. And again, it's not to say that one style is better than the other, it's just to say that this matters how people encode messages. And like for example, in a cover letter, my students here, even if they only have 1 week internship experience, they would put extensive work experience, and this is fine. This is what the employers expect to see in a resume. Whereas if you write it the Asian style, you look at that resume here in the United States, and people will say, oh, this guy is completely not qualified, unqualified. Emotions, again, in different cultures, people explain emotions in the workplace differently, and that often leads to problems. In the United States, it's not okay to get emotional at work. You leave your emotions at home. If I criticize you, that's not because I don't like you, it's because it's work. Whereas in other cultures, being emotional is much more acceptable and expected. You expect to develop personal relationships. You expected to become emotional. When something goes good or bad, you expect to be involved closer with people. And again, that may be perceived as almost corruption in some cultures, and is perfectly fine in another. And so that may lead to perception of, for example, Americans as more cold, or Japanese, whereas they would perceive Latin Americans, for example, as too cozy, too friendly, and too maybe even corrupt. Now, online communication for your take-home assignment, these slides are especially important. My research shows that, and I've been doing this research for a few years now. We conduct studies every semester with a few thousand students and a few hundred teams, and so our research shows that cross-cultural communication online is difficult for many reasons. One, differences in technical skills. It's okay if everyone can only communicate via email and nothing else. That stuff doesn't lead to problems. The problems arise when one teammate is much more advanced technologically than the other, and then there is the satisfaction, frustration, and all that stuff. So if you don't know how to use all those tools, and one of your teammates does, he would be not happy very much with you. Time zone differences is a huge problem. I sent an email from the United States to a guy in, for example, Asia. That's his end of the working day, so he will not see it until it's his morning. He will see it in his morning, which will be, for me, will be end of the day. So whenever he replies, I will not see it until my next morning. So it will be at least 24 hours before I get a reply to a regular simple email. It takes a lot of time, long time, and obviously makes communication much more difficult. Differences in correspondence styles. Again, in the United States, people just say, well, hi, hey, boss, or what's up, prof, stuff like that, right? In Middle East or Asia, people address each other much more formally, especially those in authority, like dear professor to us. And so obviously, again, this may look like a little too much of brown nosing in the United States, whereas this may be offensive to them, and that may lead to some miscommunication there. Well, this stuff is kind of outdated. How we write SMS messages now with iPhones, that's kind of outdated, but that's only to show that this was relevant 2 years ago and it's irrelevant today, and who knows what's going to be relevant in online communication tomorrow. Maybe iPhones will look so old from that perspective. Another problem is in-group favoritism and out-of-group prejudice. Those are, again, through the course of evolution, those things have been ingrained in our brain, and so again, don't want to talk about all the experiments that I wanted to discuss, because I'm afraid the video will not upload if it will be bigger than needed. But controlled experiments have shown that people, even when they are assigned to teams on a random basis, even when they see that the coin was flipped and they were assigned to team A or to team B, they'll all of a sudden develop attachment to the in-groups and become prejudiced towards out-groups, and even if such a division is completely arbitrary. But now imagine when you actually have a situation where people are really of different races, different cultures, different language groups. This becomes much more of a challenge, and so often even a problem. Now, culture, when we talk about culture, one of the problems is that people would say American culture or Chinese culture. The problem is that it's completely irrelevant, almost completely irrelevant. My studies show that there is very much in-country variation by age, by region, by education. Here are some of the regions of North America, but you can definitely imagine that geographically, no matter how much you slice and dice, you may have, like for example, a skyscraper, and so the culture in the basement of that skyscraper will be very different than the culture in the presidential suites on the top floor, right? Now, people have been studying culture for a long time, and this is one of the first studies from who knows how many years ago, 300 years ago. But by now we kind of know even better what cultures are, so they still seem to be common trends. And so the problem is that culture is very difficult to define, and I believe there will be a question about that. Like if you type in Google culture, you'll actually get more hits for culture than for sex or for money. And that was in 2011. I'm not sure how it is now, but it's a very prevalent word and one that is sometimes difficult to define. The important thing is that culture is like an onion, so you have different levels. So you have values, rituals, heroes, or culture is like an iceberg. So some parts of culture are seen, like how people talk, how people dress, but some parts of culture are completely invisible, and those are values. And the thing is that those that are easy to see, they don't matter that much. Those that are hard to see, you may spend 20 years in the country and still not know why they do the things that they do because of that difference in beliefs and values. And so that's what really governs the behavior, but at the same time that's what very difficult to spot and learn. In terms of how culture is measured, not the best method, but just so you know, normally it would be a series of statements, and people in different countries would be asked to express their agreement or disagreement with those statements. And on a 1 to 5 point scale, just tell us how much do you agree with this or with that statement. And then the averages of the individuals would be taken and aggregated to the average of the country, and that gives us some number for a country. Not the best method, there are many problems here, and so the slides discuss the problems here. Again, it's not going to be tested on the exam, I'm going to stop it here. Skip it now, but I recommend that you read the slides more carefully. This is fascinating stuff. Now, in terms of specific dimensions, and these are the several last slides, I have definitions of each dimension, individualism, collectivism, for example, and how the United States compares to the rest of the world. Notice that Canada and the United States are almost identical in most cases. Now, I also have lessons here, when you work with people from those cultures. Not want to read them now, but again, when you have time, I recommend that you read them, even though it's not going to be tested on the exam. But it's interesting stuff, it's important stuff, and I'll try to record the full lecture later on and post it for you, so hopefully you'll be interested enough to listen to it. So I'm going to skip through these different dimensions. As you see, for each of them we have definitions, we have examples, we have advice, and we have numbers where the United States is compared to other countries. You will need to know some stats. Like for example, there will be a question where I will ask how America is different from Canada, and the answer is that the two are virtually identical in terms of work-related culture. There will be also a couple of questions, like for example, Americans are more individualist, somewhere in the middle in power distance, definitely attribute status by personal achievement, not so much by origin or by birth. Gender equality, don't perceive women and men too different. There are some differences obviously, but not as much as in the Middle East. So you need to know that. And so there will be no surprises on the exam, I hope. And so let me save the lecture, and hopefully the short one will upload. All right.